Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive with us. Today we're talking about a concept that might seem a little, well, passive at first glance, but stick with
Yeah,
us.
because we're going deep on non-resistance.
Exactly. We're going to find out if going with the flow can actually be like your secret weapon for, navigating all that life throws at you.
And you know what? This isn't just some new agey idea either.
Oh, really? Tell me more.
So we're diving into this talk by a spiritual teacher, and they basically draw on all these different sources, ancient wisdom, even biblical references to explain how this whole non-resistance thing really works.
Okay, so we're talking about ancient wisdom, biblical references, non-resistance. Well, this is already shaping up to be a fascinating deep dive.
Sure.
Where do we even begin?
Well, the speaker starts off with this really powerful analogy about a river.
Ooh, I like a good analogy. Lay it on me.
Okay, so picture a river just flowing, right? It's going downstream and it comes up against a boulder. Now, does that river waste all its energy trying to muscle its way through that boulder?
No way. It flows around it.
Exactly. And the speaker uses this to illustrate that sometimes the smartest way to deal with a challenge isn't to ram your head against a wall.
Been there, done that, got the metaphorical scars to prove it.
It's
It doesn't work.
It really doesn't. Sometimes it's about finding that path of least resistance, Like, let's say you've got this massive research paper due. You could totally stress about it, stay up all night, drive yourself crazy.
Oh, I've been there too. It's not pretty.
Right. But what if instead of all that resistance, you figured out a way to work with the energy of the assignment? Maybe you break it down into smaller parts, or you find a study buddy to help you out.
Okay, that's actually a really good point. It's about finding a way to make it work, not just trying to power through it with brute force.
Right. And that's what this whole non-resistance thing is all about. It's about understanding the natural flow of things and, working with it instead of against it.
This is already making a lot of sense. Okay, so you keep mentioning energy. How does that all fit in with non-resistance?
So this is where it gets super interesting. The speaker says that when you resist something, really fight against it, you're actually draining your own energy.
Hold on. You're telling me that if I'm, freaking out about a test, I'm actually making it harder for myself.
Yep. And get this, not only are you draining your own energy, but you're actually giving power to whatever it is you're resisting.
Seriously, that's like the opposite of what I want to do.
Right. And they say this applies to everything like stress, negative thoughts, even those times you feel all tense and wound up.
Wow. Okay. I can definitely see how that would be a recipe for disaster, constantly battling against everything.
It's like trying to swim upstream against a strong current, You're just going to wear yourself out way faster than if you just kind of went with the flow a little bit.
So if we're constantly battling against the current, how do we stop? How do we go from resisting everything to actually embracing this whole go with the flow thing?
Well, the speaker talks about the power of acceptance.
Okay, but hold on a second. Doesn't that just mean giving up? If I'm cool with failing that test, am I not just setting myself up for, well, failure?
That's a really good point. And the speaker addresses that head on. They're not saying you should just roll over and accept whatever life throws at you. It's more about acknowledging a situation for what it is without judgment so you can respond from a place of clarity instead of just freaking out.
Okay, so less meltdown mode and more strategic planning mode.
Exactly. They even tie this back to the whole idea of meekness, which honestly I think gets a bad rap, especially in the competitive world of school and everything.
Yeah, meek isn't exactly the first word that comes to mind when you think of someone who's crushing it in college or whatever.
Right. But the speaker really digs into the true meaning of meekness.
Okay, so break it down for me. What is meekness, really?
So it's not about being a pushover, not at all. It's about having a strength but choosing when to use it. It's about knowing when to assert yourself and when to yield.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see where you're going with this. It's about picking your battles strategically, right?
That's it. It's about working smarter, not harder. In martial arts, sometimes the most effective move isn't to block a punch head on, but to redirect that energy. It's about using your opponent's force against them.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But instead of battling an opponent, we're battling,
Well,
everything, right? Our own thoughts, our to-do lists, that feeling of being totally overwhelmed. So how do we redirect all that?
it's about learning to surrender, which I know might sound a little intimidating at first.
Surrender. Yeah, that doesn't exactly scream success either, does it?
Yeah, I know, right? But what the speaker means by surrender is really about letting go of that need to control everything. It's about trusting that, things have a way of working out, even if we don't micromanage every little detail.
Okay, so we're talking about trusting the flow, the natural order of things. I get that. But this is where my brain starts to short circuit a little. You're saying that by surrendering, by letting go of control, we actually gain more control. How does that even work?
It does seem kind of paradoxical, right?
Just a bit.
But that's exactly the point the speaker's making. They even apply this whole idea to, like, achieving your goals, manifesting the things you want in life.
Wait, hold up. Are you saying that if I just, like, chill out about getting into that super competitive program or landing that dream internship, it'll actually make it more likely to happen?
That's essentially what they're saying, yeah.
Okay, now that's just mind-blowing. So it's not about giving up in your dreams altogether, but more about shifting your approach.
Exactly. It's about going from a place of, like, I need this so badly, and why isn't this happening fast enough, to a place of trust, a place of knowing that what's meant for you will find its way to you.
Okay, that is a serious mindset shift, but I kind of see how it could work. Like, how often do we get in our own way by overthinking things or doubting ourselves or trying to force things to happen on our timeline?
All the time. It's like we become our own worst enemies without even realizing it. And the speaker really emphasizes that all that negative self-talk, that doubt, that impatience, it creates massive resistance.
It's like we're putting up roadblocks for ourselves.
Exactly. And this is where the practical advice comes in, because the speaker actually gives us, like, tangible steps we can take to put this whole non-resistance thing into practice in our everyday lives.
Okay, yes, please. Give me the cheat codes. How do we actually do this? How do we go from resisting everything to, like, mastering the art of going with the flow?
Well, they talk about a few key things. First off, self-awareness is huge, like really paying attention to where your energy is going and how it's affecting you. They also talk about the power of positive affirmations.
Oh, like instead of saying, I don't want to fail this test, I'd say, I am going to rock this test.
You got it. It's about shifting your internal dialogue, from focusing on what you don't want to focusing on what you do want. And it's not just about the words themselves, it's about shifting that energy, that belief system. They also talk about getting different perspectives when you're facing a challenge.
So instead of stewing in my own anxiety about that presentation, I should, like, ask a friend for feedback or run it by my professor before the big day.
Yes. Sometimes a fresh perspective can make all the difference. And another big one is choosing forgiveness, both for yourself and others, over holding on to grudges.
Ugh. Yeah, holding on to anger is the worst. It's like carrying around a backpack full of rocks everywhere you go.
Right. It just weighs you down. And it doesn't actually help anything. Forgiveness is so much more freeing.
It's true. It's like they say, forgiveness is more about you than the other person, right? It's about letting go of that negativity so you can move on.
Exactly. And you know what's really interesting? All this stuff about non-resistance and going with the flow, it actually aligns really well with a lot of the research that's being done on mindfulness and self-awareness.
Oh, wow. So it's like this ancient wisdom is being backed up by modern science.
Totally. And it makes sense, right? Because when
Yeah.
you think about it, mindfulness is all about being present in the moment without judgment, which is basically the foundation of non-resistance.
Okay, that is pretty cool.
Mm.
Okay, but back to surrender for a sec, because honestly, it still feels a little fuzzy to me.
Yeah.
Like, how do we know when we're, say, strategically yielding versus just giving up when things get tough?
I know, it's a fine line. And this is where discernment comes in. The speaker emphasizes that not every battle is worth fighting.
So sometimes the go-getter mentality can actually backfire.
Sometimes, yeah. The speaker talks about how sometimes the most courageous and empowering choice you can make is to step back, reassess the situation, and maybe even change course completely. And sometimes it's about accepting a situation that you simply can't change and trusting that there's a reason for it, even if you can't see it in the moment.
It's like that saying, when one door closes, another one opens. But sometimes we're so busy banging on that closed door that we don't even notice the open one right in front of us.
That's a perfect way to put it. And that whole river analogy we talked about earlier, it actually comes into play here too.
Oh, right. The river. It doesn't just stop when it hits an obstacle, does it?
Nope. It finds a way around it, it adapts, and it doesn't waste energy getting all, like, emotionally invested in the fact that there's a boulder in its path.
It's just like, okay, boulder, whatever. You're going to
Mhm.
get to the ocean.
Mhm.
With or without your cooperation.
Exactly. And that's a really powerful way to look at life's challenges too. We can get so caught up in the struggle that we forget about the bigger picture.
Okay, I'm really vibing with this river analogy. Especially as someone who, well, let's just say I'm pretty familiar with the feeling of being overwhelmed. Like
Yeah.
sometimes it feels like I'm drowning in deadlines and expectations.
Oh, I totally feel you. And the speaker makes this point that this whole non-resistance thing, it applies to our internal world just as much as it does to our external world.
What do you mean?
So it's not just about like that mountain of homework you've been putting off. It's also about those thoughts and emotions that can create resistance within us, you know? Like all that negative self-talk, those limiting beliefs, those can be just as much of an obstacle as any external challenge.
Oh, man. Tell me about it. It's like our own minds are constantly trying to sabotage us.
Right. But the good news is that we don't have to believe every thought that pops into our heads. We have the power to choose a different perspective, a more empowering one. And the more we practice that, the easier it becomes to navigate those internal rapids too.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we actually start choosing those more empowering thoughts, especially when it feels like everything is like totally out of control?
Well, the speaker talks about connecting with your sense of purpose, like
Yeah.
really tapping into what feels meaningful to you, what gives you direction. They actually use this phrase, actionless activity, to describe it, which I know sounds a little weird at first.
Actionless activity.
Yeah.
I need some clarification on that one.
I hear you. It's definitely a head scratcher. But what they're talking about is essentially the power of aligning yourself with a greater flow, like a universal energy that's always moving, always creating. It's about tapping into that energy and letting it guide your actions instead of constantly trying to force things to happen on your own terms.
Okay, so it's not about just like sitting around and waiting for things to happen to us.
Right. It's not about being passive. It's about taking action from a place of inner alignment rather than from a place of like force or desperation.
So it's less about go get 'em, tiger, and more about trusting that, the universe has your back.
Yeah, you could say that. It's about trusting the timing of your life, knowing that you're exactly where you're supposed to be, and that everything is unfolding as it should, even if it doesn't feel like it in the moment.
This whole deep dive has been amazing. It's like a total reframe on how to approach, well, pretty much everything.
Hmm.
Like, what if letting go is actually the key to, unlocking your fullest potential?
Right. It's definitely something to think about.
It definitely is. Well, on that note, we'll leave you to ponder this whole idea of non-resistance. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.